The question assumes that there's a future for the WTO. And I'm not 100% convinced that we can take that for granted. And I think we have been taking the WTO for granted for some time. I think that the rules-based system, the multilateral rules-based system for trade, has been under some pressure for some time. I think that if you look at some of the evidence coming out of the World Trade Alert, for example, you'll see that there's an increase globally in trade that is distorted by subsidies or increases in tariffs. So I think it's you have to decide whether this is just kind of a rough patch or is this the new normal. The WTO has three basic functions. The first function is transparency, which is undervalued and unevenly practiced, but a core capacity of the WTO. The second is negotiation, and in recent years, some of the members have come to believe that it is no longer possible to negotiate high-quality agreements in such a large organization with such a disparate set of interests among the members, and they've turned to regional and plurilateral arrangements as an alternative. The third function is what we used to refer to as the jewel in the crown of the WTO, and it was the binding dispute settlements. The appellate body will no longer function in a few weeks, and it's unclear what the future of that function is. The principal concerns that have been raised by members with respect to dispute settlement, the first is that the rules don't sufficiently discipline some economies, particularly economies where there's a large role played by the state. Number two, that the panels, the appellate body, have become, the phrase that one hears is judicial activism, that they have strayed beyond the intent of the members with respect to the disciplines to, in effect, create new disciplines, and that they have taken an independence from the members that wasn't perhaps intended. At the same time, because of the difficulty to deliver new agreements, there has been a kind of a waning interest in the business community, and as I say, some of the members have turned to other fora to advance their interests. And perhaps another concern with the WTO is that because the negotiations function has been weak in recent years, the organization hasn't addressed the modern issues in the economy, at least sufficiently. So the question is, what can a country do? What can a WTO member do? What can India and Canada do to try to address the issue? I think the first is that we should all show some more urgency in responding. We should take actions, almost any kind of action, to have activity, renewed activity in all of the fora of the WTO. In particular, we should try very hard to see if we can come to consensus on new issues. Fisheries and domestic regulations are two that leap to mind, where we could show perhaps some progress and strengthen the credibility of the organization in the near term. I think that if these could be consensus proposals made by groups of countries, they would obviously be stronger. But even unilateral proposals and engagement on the issues in all of the fora of the WTO would be very welcome. The question perhaps needs some clarity, because I thought we had a framework for global trade and services, and I refer to the GATS, the General Agreement on Trade and Services. Clearly, it was a first attempt at a framework in the Uruguay round, and much was left to be done in the future. That's why we had a built-in agenda and agreed to come back to services 5 years later. Well, that was many years ago.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What is it? Okay, sorry, I'm so sorry. Yeah, we can just go.
So we came back to services in the Doha round. Regrettably, there wasn't consensus either in services or in the round. So some have turned to plurilateral discussions to try to advance the framework for trade and services. I refer in particular to the TISA, the Trade and Services Agreement, where a group of countries have tried to go farther, but doesn't enjoy the engagement, the participation of all of the members, and clearly we could look for more. There are other fora in which we can advance. We can strengthen that framework over time. There are discussions in the OECD, there are discussions in the G20 and elsewhere. They don't enjoy the full engagement of key WTO members either. And so I guess as a prescription, I would suggest that we all need to be engaged as fulsomely as we possibly can. Another idea that has resurfaced, there are no new ideas, they just come around from time to time, and that's to return to the approach where we would look at clusters. We'd look at a particular industry and look through all of the issues that affect trade in that industry, and that would cross the existing agreements, goods, services, intellectual property, and other investment, to try to address all of the questions that a particular industry has. That's an approach that at one point was proposed by India in our discussions for a comprehensive trade agreement. It's an approach that was proposed by the United States and others in Geneva in the Doha round. And perhaps it's a way to come at our interests from a different angle, and without trying to balance all of the interests of all of the industries, we might be able to focus on those of particular interest to us and move forward in that way. So I guess it's the same prescription for what Canada and India can do, is be heavily engaged in all of these, or any of these fora, to try to advance discussions.